The government has released several major policies in the past week, including extending an effective freeze on the pay of 3/4 of public sector workers for 3 years and introducing fair pay agreements that would effectively set minimum employment conditions for entire occupations and industries. Joining Breakfast from Wellington to address these issues and hopefully others is National Party leader Judith Collins. Morena, Judith, how are you?
Oh, I'm great, thank you, Jenny May.
Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about the public sector pay freeze first of all. Was there somewhat of a backdown by the government after their hooey yesterday with the Council of Trade Unions and the Public Service Association?
Well, it must have been quite an interesting meeting, Jenny May. Don't know why they didn't invite me, but I'd say it's a pretty stunning reversal. We had obviously the government employed 10,000 more bureaucrats, and most of those before COVID actually hit. The costs went up by $1.3 billion in the first 3 years of the government, and now suddenly the nurses and the police officers, corrections officers, they're being told, and teachers, that they get to pay for it. So I think the problem is the government's own making.
So, I mean, the reason for this pay freeze was around fiscal prudence and pay equity among people earning less than 60k a year. So how do you get that right? And then how do you pay for it? How do you fund it?
Well, you don't employ 10,000 more highly paid bureaucrats in Wellington like the government did.
The answer to that was around COVID and what they need in order to, I guess, strengthen the border, etc.
But actually, Jenny May, that's just completely incorrect. I mean, the government is spinning that, but ultimately, what do you mean strengthening the border? We had no planes coming in. It wasn't, and they were employed before COVID, most of these people. So it's simply just spin. And look, I just look at the evidence, and the evidence is really clear. Nurses and teachers and police officers and corrections officers, most of whom had to work all the way through the lockdowns, they now get to pay because the government hasn't been fiscally prudent, and they've spent $1.3 billion more in 3 years, and we spent $1 billion in 10 years or 9 years. So, no, I don't think that's right.
I want to step sideways on this issue because I did an interview yesterday with Alison Eddy, the New Zealand College of Midwives. She was talking about midwives feeling undervalued and overwhelmed. I know that yesterday you suggested that the pay freeze for our public sector workers could drive our teachers, our nurses, etc., to Australia, and that is the same concern that Alison expressed yesterday. I mean, how do you tackle this? And I guess I'm talking specifically around midwives in terms of, I mean, these women are incredible. They're delivering our babies. So, I mean, how do we look after them?
Well, you're quite right, Jenny May, and of course midwives are not a nice to have. They're not a bureaucrat who's employed to write a policy paper. These are people who we have to have, that's it. And that's why I say the government overspent at the start, spent up $1.3 billion extra, and now all these people are being told, well, you either have a pay freeze or essentially it's a pay cut because the cost of living is going up so much. And when you say, well, they want some equity between lower paid people and higher paid people, what does that mean? It means that there's no difference in the pay? There's a universal pay? I mean, it's just nonsense. The fact is, people who are higher qualified, who have skills that are more highly sought, need to be paid more for that. And that's otherwise they'll go to Australia.
How much would you pay them?
Well, I'm not going to help the government out of the hole they've dug themselves, Jenny May, but I would say this, is that the government would have a lot more headroom if they hadn't overspent at the start. And you just think about the money that they wasted in those first three years, and that was pre-COVID. I don't think we should worry so much that it's all on COVID. The thought there's 10,000 people suddenly protecting a border when we've got no planes flying, I mean, that's just total errant nonsense.